From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Hey everybody, it's Matt Shares. Welcome to SBI TV. I'm here for a special show. Tony Erickson from SBI, who co-leads our TMT practice, and I've asked Tony to come and join me specifically to talk a little bit about what market-leading CEOs are doing around tech-enabled services. So I'm really excited to have Tony here, and what he and I are going to discuss really are three core things. Number one, this concept of observers versus accelerators. And how do you know which camp you fit into as somebody planning for 2021? Number two, the three big trends that we're seeing in and around tech-enabled services, and Tony's going to share some feedback about certain things he's observed with the team and how they might impact you. And then lastly, as you think about moving into 2021 planning and capturing opportunity, how should you be allocating your go-to-market spend? So that's what we're going to spend our time on. Tony, good to see you, brother.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here.
So, Tony, I guess as a way of getting started, let's first define, and I know I asked you to come and talk about tech-enabled services because you do a lot of work across multiple vectors for us, but maybe just define what tech-enabled services mean, and then we'll jump into a couple of the specific vertical examples that you've observed.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's one that often gets misconstrued. So when you think about tech-enabled services, gone are the days of doing everything with brute force and just throwing more bodies at it. The introductions of robotic processing agents or RPAs and other tech-enabled solutions, whether you're talking about devices, whether you're talking about IoT, internet-operated devices, the Internet of Things, yep, or whether you're talking about software that enables those people to be more efficient with their job, it all bundles into this concept of let's make the people doing the job more efficient with technology.
Yep, perfect. So, Tony, one of the things we observed and what I asked you to come speak about is we're releasing our research, and really it's focused on the last 6 months about what companies have done, and specifically CEOs and their teams, to prepare themselves in a very pragmatic way to accelerate their rate of revenue growth. And one of the things that we found at the macro is there's really three camps. There's survivors, people that are letting the headwinds overtake them, and they're barely hanging on. There's observers, people kind of sitting in the middle, and that's about 2/3 of the folks that we saw that are observing what's happening, making one small move and then reacting and waiting. And then there's this group called accelerators. And those are the people that are widening the gap, right? They're reimagining their commercial engine, right? They've reassessed the growth strategy, but they're driving this level of execution. And we talk about that in the report, specifically the one that you co-wrote. Where I'd like to start, I guess, is when you think about the trends that are impacting that vertical, maybe share a little bit from your perspective. And what is it about those accelerators you've noticed as you overlay them across those trends?
The single biggest impact to this vertical, if we're referring to tech-enabled services, has been a move from traditional FTE pricing, heads on sticks, butts in seats, whatever phrase you want to use, to outcome-based and value-based. Yep. And rather than doing a P times Q exercise to arrive at the actual cost of the service being provided by these companies, regardless of which camp they're in, getting to an outcome. It's often the most difficult piece to quantify. It's the most difficult piece to develop the evidence to support, to get a buyer bought in. But once you do, you become institutional and you become ingrained within every aspect of the business because you're driving an outcome. You're not putting people on site to just be there punching a clock.
Got it. So Tony, one of the three trends, and everybody's talked about digital and its impact. And what you just laid out is a big step around digital evolution. And I know you and I are believers that transformation means start, stop. Evolution means you're always improving. And that's what folks should be doing. But I guess talk about changes to the buyer and expectations around customer experience over the past 6 months. And what are those couple things that you're seeing the market leaders grab a hold of and they're separating themselves from those that are more in the observer camp?
Yeah, digital has been disrupting this industry for a long time. but nothing disrupted it more than the last 6 months, which is the selling motion.
Yeah.
I mean, rarely have people conducted these virtual oral sessions or virtual presentations, which might have had 50 people in a conference room before, to talk about the outcomes and to talk about the whole list of transformational activities and transitioning from one company to another and putting in a new service provider. It has fundamentally been the biggest disruption and forcing function that this industry has ever seen. And when you really think about the change in that buying behavior, at the end of the day, they're still consuming a service and consuming a technology, but now being in a position where you have to present it and demonstrate the value in a virtual model is unlike anything that's ever been done in this industry. It is probably the most disruptive piece, which, really gets into the existing logos and your current customer base are one thing, but how do you go find a new? That is probably the biggest challenge, is generating something new versus staying focused on what got you to where you're at.
So, Tony, if we think about, some of the recent engagements and where you spend your time on very large, sort of what I would call sticky work that's got to get done with a lot at stake. Anything you can share specifically on that new logo example? Because I think you and I would agree, everybody sort of put their arms around the customer base, and that's great, repackaging and pricing and being mindful, but you and I have been around long enough to know you got to bring in new customers. Pick your end market, it's still a lifeblood. Can you share anything that you're seeing there that the audience and the viewers could catch on to as they're thinking about 21?
I think the most significant trend that we've seen was frankly a reversal. Most of these customers of these companies who provide tech-enabled services were coming into the year expecting, on average, a 5% technology increase budget across all verticals, all customers, all end customers that they're selling to.
Yep.
COVID hit, budgets got slashed. Macro implication was, not only did they not see a 5% increase, it was an 8% year-over-year decrease as everyone went and tightened the belt. So the addressable market just evaporated by 13% overnight. So you've got to be much more diligent. You've got to be much more value-based. You've got to be much more quantified to ultimately get them to make the move. And you have to have demonstrable ROI that is indisputable.
So Tony, when you think about demand drivers, right, and as the CEO who's watching or listening to this show, who's saying, okay, got it, 13% swing, impactful, is there a way that what you would call market leaders adapted to new demand drivers, whether through reallocation of budgets or different end market decisions that they made, that you were like, that is what good looks like?
When you think about it, it's the journey that you're taking this customer on.
Yep.
And frankly, it's a repurposing of what they've done historically. So the concept for these companies providing tech-enabled services, they need their end customer base to agree with this concept of moving from high-touch, low-tech to high-tech, low-touch. They have to make that transition. So the companies who can get their users and their clients bought into that motion have a significant leg up. If you're just trying to show that you're able to process a widget faster or process an actual, service quicker, that's not at the end of the day what they're getting to. They need something that's autonomous, something that can be scaled, something that can be scaled up and down, by the way, because these variable swings, they need to put that variable cost base into their overall business. So that's ultimately the code that they're trying to crack with their change in their motion.
Okay. So Tony, the last piece I'd like you to talk a little bit about, in our time together at SBI, you've seen different companies with different levels of execution. Your time prior to SBI, from Accenture to IBM, you've seen a lot of large companies get reimagined, and end customers that you managed go through different components. So I consider you to be an execution expert. Talk a little bit about this concept of the revenue growth office and this almost central nervous system that you're seeing in some of the market leaders versus maybe those that are having a hard time getting out of the blocks.
Yeah, it's a trend that we're seeing across all industries and all sizes of companies. And market leaders are actually establishing that growth office so that everything culminates into one place. And you don't have project code name, and everyone talks about them as if they're something that is kind of cloak and dagger like. It all comes to a central place. The ELT hears the report. The ELT sees the metrics, sees the leading and lagging KPIs. And if it's not producing the expected ROI, they make a change. It allows them to course correct. It allows them to continually improve, manage expectations. And if they're not seeing the expected results, redeploy their resources and their strategy and their time and their money.
So Tony, so you said it's cross-functional, right? There's a cadence, and I know you're a cadence freak. Who runs that RGO?
Short answer is it depends. Any good consulting answer. But depending on whether or not the organization actually has a chief strategy officer or whether or not they've actually got a COO, that's often where we will see it. In smaller organizations where there might be a CRO, it can live there as well. But ultimately, it has to have CEO and even board level backing. Otherwise, it just doesn't get the support. And, it's kind of one of those things. Why do most projects fail? If you go back to Project Management 101, lack of executive sponsorship. So it doesn't matter who owns it and who executes against it. What matters is who supports it and who endorses it and makes sure it's going to get done from the top.
Dynamite. Tony, thank you for, I know how busy you are, so thanks for taking time to share a little bit about what the accelerators are doing, and specifically in light of everything that you see. Always good to see you, man.
Thanks, Matt. You too.
All right, folks, there you have it. Straight from the street, my man Tony laying out what accelerators are doing. So as you're thinking about your 2021 plan, a couple of key takeaways from what Tony talked about. The ability to shift from being one of those folks who's an observer, reacting, to being an accelerator. How do you reassess the growth strategy, number one? Number two, as you think about your options, running your commercial engine, Tony talked about the rigor, right, of how to run that, which parlays into number three, the revenue growth office. If you have a cross-functional team and you're running on a cadence, ensures that people are going to hit the milestones, and if they don't, and if bets aren't working, as Tony said, you stop them and you reallocate. As always, wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.